We're recording now. Okay, so let me just introduce you very quickly, Krista. So Krista's she reports, she writes, edits stories, and focuses on people, places, and the natural world. So she has a column for Outside Magazine about kids in the outdoors. This might be a bit of an old bio, Krista. Is this still up to date?
That's totally up to date.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Good, good. And you've written for publications like Adventure Journal, The Atlantic, 538, National Geographic News, Smithsonian. So a lot of different magazines, a lot of different websites. And then before you started into this kind of journalism route, you were a canoe and kayak guide, which is pretty darn cool. A farmer, a teacher. So you've kind of done it all.
Yeah, I came to writing a little later in life. I mean, not that late, but in my late 20s, pretty much, and kind of bounced around and did a lot of other cool stuff before that.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask a few questions just to kind of get things going, and that will let the students take over with a few questions as well. But the first one is just, how did you get started? You said you got a little bit of a later start in life. What did you do to kind of get things rolling?
Yeah. So I graduated from college in 2006 and thought I wanted to be a writer. Like, I had taken a bunch of writing classes, including a couple of journalism classes, but the journalism classes that I had taken in college were more focused on kind of the rote daily news type of journalism, which didn't interest me all that much at the time. I thought I wanted to do something a little more literary, a little more creative, but I didn't really know at the time how to make a living doing that. And I didn't really have any ideas. And so right after college, I went to teach English in the Marshall Islands for a year. And when I came back, I was broke and I was waiting tables. And I waited on a guy who happened to own an academic publishing company. And while he was waiting for his colleagues to join him, we started chatting and he pretty much offered me a job. So that was my first writing gig. I was writing just kind of like marketing copy and flyers and websites and that sort of thing. And it was cool, but it was boring. And so
Yeah.
I left and I went and did trail work and guided trail crews in Idaho for a while, and then went up to Alaska and worked as a canoe and kayak guide. And then I kind of had this trajectory throughout my 20s of going back and forth between kind of stable writing jobs and exciting adventure jobs. So, and so when I was doing the adventurous stuff, I was like, this is awesome. But I missed the creativity and the like intellectual aspect of writing. So then I would go do a writing job and then I would miss the adventure of being outside. So after guiding these 7-week canoe expeditions for kids in Alaska, I went back to New England, where I'm originally from, and saw that a newspaper was hiring for a reporter, and on the Vermont, New Hampshire border. And I had no journalism experience, but I thought, being a newspaper reporter sounds kind of cool. So I applied for the job, and the editor had me come up and sent me to like a school board meeting and like had me write a practice story on it. And later on, he told me, like, if your story was awful and we didn't publish it, like, it was fine. We didn't need to cover this school board meeting. It wasn't imperative. But I ended up writing an okay story about it, and it published in the newspaper the next day. And he asked me, he was kind of impressed, I think. And I said, well, when you told me I was going to be covering a meeting, I watched a bunch of like city council meetings on YouTube and wrote practice stories. And he was like, wow, like, such a great initiative. So basically he hired me as a daily newspaper reporter, which I did for about a year and a half. And the pay wasn't great, but like, I learned on the job, and I was with a lot of veteran reporters in the newsroom. And so I like overheard how they interviewed people. I got to ask them a lot of questions. I had some great editors. So I learned a ton. But again, I was stuck in that cycle of like, well, now I really miss being outside. So I left and I went and worked as a kayak guide in New Zealand for a while. And then I finally figured out how to combine those two things, the outdoor adventure and the writing, which to me was to be a journalist who writes stories for like longer stories for magazines and websites. And those stories tend to be about the outdoors and environmental issues and science, and things that allow me to kind of get outside and get into the field and tag along with really cool people while also having that intellectual creative outlet of writing about it. And it's kind of been the perfect fit for me. So to move from daily newspaper journalism to that, I started out as an intern at a regional magazine that covers the American West called High Country News. Did an internship, a paid internship for 6 months, jumped from there to a fellowship with the magazine that lasted another year. And then in 2015, I felt like that experience had given me enough knowledge of writing magazine stories and pitching magazine stories that I was, and like connections with other people in the magazine world, that I was able to jump out as a freelancer. And so I have been a freelancer since 2015, so going on 6 years now. And like you said, it's been really great. Like, I think there's a lot of like dire news about the media industry, for sure, journalism specifically. And because of that, there's a lot of people who discourage young people from going into journalism, especially young people who don't have like a financial safety net necessarily. And so one thing that I just really want to emphasize is that I had no family support. I had student loans out the wazoo. I completely supported myself 100% through writing for the last 6 years. And it's totally possible and it's totally doable. And I've gotten to travel to really cool places, from the Arctic to going back to the Marshall Islands. And I work very part-time right now because I have a 2-year-old, and it's super flexible. Like, I get to kind of set my own hours and work, roughly half time and make like an okay salary. So it's pretty cool.
All right. So it sounds like you kind of drifted away from time to time, but you kept kind of getting pulled back to writing each time. Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
So one of our big writing assignments is we're taking a journal article. So they're picking a journal article, something from the biological science world, and they're distilling it down to a blog post, a 200-word summary, and then a couple social media posts. So curious about your process when you're thinking about writing for the general public. What are some things that go through your mind? How do you prepare when you're writing something, a piece?
Well, I pretty much only write for the general public. So yeah, I really do see like my main job, especially when I'm writing about science. Like, I don't only write about science, but when I am writing about science, I see my main job as being like the liaison between the scientists and the public, and trying to distill the essence of what can be some very complicated science, and certainly language that is not comprehensible to the average reader. That, like, the way that things just get written in scientific papers. Like, my job is to take that and translate it to something that is both understandable and that like grabs somebody's attention and is interesting. And the way that I do that latter part is really by like turning it into a story where, like, here's a problem, here's a gap in knowledge, here's something that's missing or some kind of problem, and then moving along to a solution and an answer. And usually those stories work best if they're, sometimes they can be about animals, but they often work best if there's a human element, like, like a hero's journey almost, a person who is like trying to solve this problem. And then you also have to explain why that problem matters, why it affects, how it affects the real world, how it might even affect the readers' lives. So the way that I go about getting from this complicated, jargony scientific paper to a story about a person or a group of people is, I first start out by reading the actual scientific literature. And then I reach out to at least one of the authors and usually just have a conversation with them. And, even though they tend to write for academic journals in this kind of hard to understand voice, a lot of scientists, when you actually get them on the phone, have stories to tell and, speak in a way that you can really understand. And so I record the calls and, pull quotes, and I ask them questions about why they got interested in this particular weird scientific topic that they're super interested in. When the first time they realized that this thing was a problem, what the process was like. Like often in the scientific paper, there will be like, analyzed 20,000 hours of game camera footage to synthesize blah, blah, blah. And, I just asked them like, hey, what was that like? Like, were you just sitting in front of a computer? Like, I try to get as many sensory details from them as possible, because that's really, I think, what turns this dry scientific paper into a story that grabs somebody and is interesting to read. I don't know, does that sort of answer the question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I want to turn things over now to the students and give them an opportunity to ask some questions. We've been talking about writing for a couple of weeks now. We've watched some videos, we've read some things, we've used message boxes, but I'd like to give the floor to the students, see if they have a few questions for you, Krista, about anything from career to writing to inspirations, that kind of thing. So don't be shy, use your mics. Oh, I see something here already. So Jane is wondering, how do you juggle being a writer and a parent?
Well, good question. I sometimes don't juggle it very well and I drop a lot of the balls. But I do think that freelance writing specifically has made it possible for me. I think if I was a staff, I've never really wanted to be a staff writer at a magazine, because once I started freelancing, that flexibility of being able to set your own hours and take if you decide I want to make less money and work less and, spend more time either vacationing and doing cool stuff or like with my kid, that's a choice, to some degree. Obviously, like there's a certain amount of money that you just need to make, but that's a choice that to some degree you can make. And so when my daughter was born, I was like, I didn't have any maternity leave whatsoever. I'm in the United States, which sucks at all of that. So I didn't have any kind of paid maternity leave. And I just told myself that I was going to wrap up as many projects as I could and take 6 weeks off. And by the end of that 6 weeks, like, Joe, you mentioned that throughout this whole trajectory towards becoming a writer, I wandered away a bunch of times and always found my way back, because when I'm not writing, I think about writing constantly. If I'm just like, reading the news or on social media, I see something and be like, oh my God, that could be a story. And then I turn it over in my head and think about it. So even after, during my 6 weeks off with my baby, I was like starting to like get that itch again. And I wanted to write some. And, when she was really young, it was super easy because she would just sleep a ton and I could just bounce her on my chest while I was typing. So I definitely transitioned to doing more phone reporting rather than in-person reporting. But now she's a little bit older. I've taken her on a reporting trip, at least one reporting trip with me back when, you could travel and go on reporting trips. And now she's in daycare a couple days a week. So a couple days a week I work and a couple days a week she's in daycare. And, sometimes I end up working late at night or working on weekends or whatever. But again, having that flexibility of freelancing has really made it possible, because I don't think I would have wanted to be working 40 hours a week. You don't really get a whole lot of time with your kid when you're working 40 hours a week. And I like to work 20 hours a week, and if the other rest of my time with her, it works out really well for me personally. So I don't know. Yeah.
All right. No, that makes total sense. And it sounds like, writing can give you that flexibility and still, make a decent living too. Anmal is with us, and she wants to know, what are some of your favorite ways to grab a reader's attention? Is there something you do specifically, or is it different every time?
I think it's different every time. And I think it's evolved as I've evolved as a writer. I think when I was starting out, there was this sort of structure that I followed a lot. And the structure was start out with a specific person, like, Joe Smith was, and start out with like an action, was walking through the rainforest near his home in Nicaragua. Well, I don't know why Joe Smith would be living in Nicaragua. Jose Smith was living in Nicaragua and walking through the rainforest one day when he noticed the trees that had always been green, the leaves were all suddenly turning brown, and he wanted to know. So that's why I would start with that, like kind of zoomed in, and then zoom out for the middle of the story to explain the science of what's going on with these trees, why it's linked to this bigger picture of global warming or acidification or whatever, and explain some of the science, etc. And then at the end, kind of go back into Jose Smith and how it affects him in his life. And that's like a structure that works really well. And I still follow it sometimes. But I think after doing that for a few years, I also got a little bit bored with that structure. And so I've done a lot of other, now it's like kind of fun to play around. And again, like it really differs with each story. I try to find the thing that grabs my attention and that interests me, and just hope that that'll also interest other people. So maybe it's like a detail about the environment, like maybe this particular rainforest has something that is only found in this one, corner of the world. And instead of talking about a person, I can start out with like a sort of a little bit more literary paragraph about why this rainforest is unique and beautiful and biologically rich and why that matters. Sorry, my dog is whining. And, not all editors are into that. Like there are editors who some editors who want to start out with like, right in the first paragraph, get to why the story is important. And like, those editors I'm not that, I don't know. It seems kind of rote and boring to me. If I end up working with an editor who really wants that, I try to not really work with that editor anymore. Some are, they don't need that, but they do want to start with a person and an action, and that's okay, and like sometimes that totally works. But I really like it when an editor is interested or like willing to accept a little bit of exposition about like why this place is so beautiful, like ground something in a place first and then introduce the person. And I love being allowed that degree of creativity. So yeah, I think it differs from story to story. And I think it really just depends on what interests you as a writer. Like you are the best to judge, like it's your story that you're telling, and so whatever interests you particularly, like you chose that story for a reason, right? Because something about the bigger picture interested you, and it's your job to make that whole bigger picture interesting to your reader. So whatever interested you about the bigger picture, like you also have insight into a specific thing within that that interests you, and start with that, or use that as your framework or whatever.
All right. Well, one more question, and then we'll let you continue with your day. This has been great, Krista. Thank you so much. Gurpreet would like to know, when you started transitioning to freelancing, did you have specific resources you used? How were you able to showcase your previous work?
showcase my previous work, like I just have a personal website where I include some of my stuff, which really should be updated. So nobody go look at it right now. Um, but what resources did I use? There's a really great resource called the Open Notebook. I don't know if you guys have come across that in your class yet, but it's specifically for science writers, and they have all sorts of posts and articles about the full gamut of things that science writers are interested or need to know for their work. But one of the things that is really helpful there is a pitch database. So they have, if you wrote or a writer wrote a feature story for a print magazine of National Geographic. I think a lot of print features for Nat Geo get assigned. A lot of them don't come from pitches, but if somebody happened to be like one of the rare unicorns who pitched a story to National Geographic and it got accepted as a print feature, you can go to the pitch database in the Open Notebook and find exactly how they pitched that story to the editor. And it's great. Like, you can just basically use those for inspiration, copy the style, the structure, etc. But yeah, like it's kind of all about pitching, and pitching is, distilling into 3 or 4 paragraphs what the story is, how you're a good writer, and why you are the writer who should be the one who gets to tell this particular story. So I did send out a lot of cold pitches when I first started. And then networking is really huge, which kind of is hard now because I live in a small town of like 18,000 people that's not near any major airports or highways. And I don't get to have that like New York literary scene. But honestly, Twitter has been hugely helpful for me. I was like pretty anti-Twitter when I started, and I like legitimately enjoy it now, and I've connected with a lot of other writers and a lot of editors on Twitter. So just like getting your name and yourself out there. Also going to journalism conferences, the National Association or the North American Science Writers Association, NASA? No, not. Anyway, whatever. NAWSA. Is one, the Society of Environmental Journalists, SEJ, is another. And just going to these conferences maybe once a year, where a lot of editors will be, and just doing the old schmoozing thing. But really just like, the more people know your name, the more likely they are to respond to a pitch, because editors do get slammed with a lot of pitches. And it's pretty common when you're first starting out to just not hear anything back from them. But if they have met you even once, if they know you even once, then they're far more likely to at least respond with a no. And if they respond with a no, you can ask like, what about this didn't work? And you can at least continue the conversation. And maybe, you can say, if the story didn't work, do you have anything you want to assign? And yeah, it kind of just snowballs from there.
All right. Well, I was gonna put your website in the chat, but now that you don't want people going there, I'm not going to share it there. If students stumble upon it on their own, fair enough. But Krista, thank you so much for joining us. I was grabbed by a piece that you did on the Marshall Islands, which is why I reached out to have you join in Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. And I thought you'd be a great voice to talk to our students a little bit about writing. So thank you so much for letting us steal some of your time today and hanging out with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for getting in touch and thinking of me. And if anybody has any further questions and wanted to correspond by email, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll do my best to respond. Can I put it in the chat here?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, happy Perfect. To help anybody who wants to get started in a journalism/writing career. And so if you have anything that I didn't get to address, feel free to shoot me an email. And thanks so much for your time.
All right. Thank you so much, Krista. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Students, that was so great for Krista to join us and share a little bit of her story. We have Jonathan Colby standing by. I'm so excited to see him. I'm just smiling seeing his face. I haven't seen his face in so long. So it's really exciting. I'm going to do something really weird. I'm going to run away from my computer for 30 seconds. I have a new puppy, I think the students know, and he's mad. I've been hosting events all morning. He's mad. So I'm going to give him a frozen Kong with some peanut butter in it. I'll be back in 30 seconds. Right back. Okay, I tell you, having a puppy is just like having kids again. There's baby gates all around my house. I've got to hurdle baby gates. It's an adventure. It's something. So let me unmute. Where is Jonathan? There he is. Jonathan, can you unmute for me? I forgot Zoom likes permissions now.
Right.
Okay, well, we have Jonathan Colby joining us, National Geographic explorer, amazing scientist, the frog master of the planet, I think, and just a really great guy. And I wanted to bring him in today because he's an awesome writer. He does amazing work around the world, and he's a social media guru, at least compared to me, who gets frustrated with it really easily. So, Jonathan, it is so great to have you joining us today. Are you in the UK or France right now? Where are you?
No, I'm in New Jersey at the moment. I should be in France, but thank you, COVID, I'm not.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't realize you came back over. Very cool. Well, New Jersey, I'm sure there's some good things about New Jersey.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll go with that. Well, great to see you. And that makes more sense because when I messaged you last night and you messaged back, I thought it was like 2 a.m. Like,
well, I mean, that's also possible, but you know, that's another issue.
All right. Well, listen, I wanted the students to get to know you a little bit first. So I'm going to ask you a few questions to get us rolling. And let's start off with your science work, because that's how I first came across you. I think it probably was Twitter. And I think I reached out to see if you do an event with my class. And so tell us a little bit about your work in Honduras, and of course, HARC, because it's just awesome.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, I wear a lot of hats, but my science hat is that I study a global disease event causing a frog pandemic. So there was an amphibian extinction crisis that we've been studying for almost 20 years now, largely caused by a single disease caused by something called chytrid fungus. And it's this fascinating, weird, ancient fungus that lives in the water and swims around. It has like a tail. It actually swims like an animal until it hits an amphibian, latches onto its skin, burrows in, and that's where it grows. And it causes all sorts of problems because for amphibians, their skin is so important for respiration and chemical balance. So when you have diseases that really start messing with your skin function, eventually it often leads to death. And I studied it from a lot of different perspectives. During my PhD work, I was trying to understand how did this spread to 50, 60, 70 countries so fast, and how much of that is caused by people and trade. But in Honduras, and this is how I got to know Joe, I've been studying what happens at the local level when this disease hits an area of protected forest. And what does that mean for the amphibians? What does that mean for endangered species? And is there anything we can do to help them? So a number of years ago, I partnered up with some zoos in a couple of countries and some other organizations. And we created a rescue program called the Honduras Amphibian Rescue and Conservation Center, which is a kind of like a captive breeding frog hospital kind of facility that we've constructed in country in Honduras to try to start taking some of these sick frogs out of the rainforest before they die from this disease, see if we can figure out how to fix them up and make them stronger to the point where we can start putting them back in the forest where they belong, and see if we can get past this bottleneck, which is threatening them with extinction. There are a handful of other zoos around the world that are trying something like this, but the thing that we're trying to do different is that most zoos haven't been able to start trying to put frogs back into the wild yet. Because the other weird, scary thing about this disease is that there's really no vaccine or single cure-all cure. So there's a variety of different ways we can help the frogs not die. But unlike mammals, there's a lot of talk these days about vaccines because of COVID. But interestingly, generally speaking, amphibians don't respond to vaccines the way mammals do. So it makes it really hard when a pandemic hits amphibians because we haven't been able to figure out how to give them a vaccine, put them back in the wild where the disease will never really go away, and allow them to have greater resistance. So that's kind of what we're working on. We're trying to find other ways of working around that. Because meanwhile, more and more species are heading towards extinction, and we're running out of space and time to do something about it. So yeah, that's my frog stuff.
All right. And so I highly suggest Instagram or Twitter at myfrogcroaked. You can see, well, Jonathan's an incredible photographer, likes to get down there with the macro and get some of those just amazing shots of not just amphibians, but reptiles in general, insects. Lots of great images can be found on those social media pages. And segueing into social media, you've got a good following. You're very active. What did you do starting out on social media? How did you get rolling, and how do you keep people interested in coming back?
Sure. Well, one quick question, Joe. I see there's some questions popping up on the side. Should I answer those?
Yeah, go for it. If you want to jump in something.
Okay. Yeah. First off, the name of the fungus, it's called chytrid. It sounds different than it's spelled. It's chytrid, chytrid fungus. The scientific name is very long and complicated, but if you Google chytrid, there'll be a lot of stuff that comes up. And then someone also asked, can you tell how they're sick? Is it visible on their skin? No, and that's what makes this really hard. Sometimes the frogs get little sores and like redness, and like you can see it, but a lot of times you can't see it. And that also makes it difficult to explain to the public that there's such a big problem happening, because you could literally walk into a forest and see a bunch of frogs sitting there looking normal, and then a day or two later they might die. So reptiles and amphibians don't often show a lot of symptoms when they're sick until they're so sick that they're about to be dead. And that also makes it hard to treat them because they don't often show a lot of symptoms. It's interesting. So yeah. Okay, back to you, Joe. You're asking about social media?
Yeah, social media. How did you get the ball rolling, and how do you keep people engaged and coming back?
Yeah, so just like Krista was saying, I never really used to have much interest in social media back in the day. Like, it wasn't until about 5 years ago that I started using Twitter and Instagram and Tumblr and everything else. I had a Facebook account, but that was just for friends and pictures. And social media to me was more of a foreign thing of just unnecessary. Here's what I ate for lunch and stuff like that. I used to think that, and it's interesting because the reason why I decided to start all my social media accounts 5 years ago is because I was almost done with my PhD, and I didn't really know what I was going to do next. I mean, like, I know what I enjoy doing, but as far as getting jobs and like really finding a career path, I didn't really know what was in front of me. And I was about 6 months from finishing, and a lot of people were starting to talk more about using Twitter and social media for networking and sharing your work and finding like-minded people. And I never really gave it much thought before that, but I figured, all right, I got nothing to lose. I'm getting kind of scared. I might as well just put myself out there and start by seeing if I can at least get people excited about the papers that I'm publishing. And that's when I made my Frog Cooked accounts. Which I was so excited no one had taken that name. I was like, how is that name? Is it My Frog Cooked? How does that not already exist? But it didn't. But I started sharing the work I was doing on chytrid fungus and disease. And I was able to tell right away, because you can see the metrics on some of the academic websites when people read your work, when they download it, when they cite it and reference it. And I was convinced in a short period of time that sharing myself on social media was helping me academically and leading to more opportunities. But then there was a transition point when, I started to realize that these tools are not just really important for personal gain, like for work, but also for the greater good, for the things that we study and the things that we care about. I got really, really interested in, the social aspect of social media, of, as a scientist, how do I just get people to care more about this stuff? And how do I get people excited about the things that matter to me, beyond just sharing my papers? And at that time, and still today, I feel that there's so many great scientists out there, and more are starting to use these sites, but it's not always so easy to learn how to engage with people. And I think there's always a need for more people to dabble with that and experiment, and try different ways of talking to people, try different words, try different hashtags, try different pictures. And there's a lot of guidelines that I've learned along the way, just by reading about what works and what doesn't work, and what time of day and what algorithms. Like, everything matters to an extent, but after a certain extent, it's also, to me, an experiment. And I think that's why it also excites me, is because I can tell you how to be more visible on social media, how to get more followers, but at the end of the day, I also know I could post the exact same thing twice, 2 different times, 2 different days, and they will not act the same. One time it might go viral, another time 2 people see it, and one of those people might be my sister. And I just find that fascinating, that to an extent it's always a social experiment on how do I talk better to people. And I think it's so important, because I think that there's still this mentality in academia that our goal is publishing, our goal is having an academic track record. And there is value in that, but I strongly believe we need to go further than that. And at least personally, I feel that once I've published something, I'm not done, because if it cared so much to me that I spent so much time and money, I want to know that people are reading it, and I want to know how people feel about it. And I think social media is such a good tool for that.
All right. You did have a really cool, not a contest, but a game going for a while, where you'd have really close-ups of your pictures, and people would have to guess, what species was this, or what animal was this. So that, a neat way to keep people engaged and looking to find out. Did you find that was pretty engaging? Were people into that?
It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I mean, there's things that I'd like to revisit, because now I am also freelance, which is another thing. And I'm wanting to spend more time in things that matter to me, like that were just, they were great, but it was just a bit much to keep track of all the time. But it was interesting because, so I had this Twitter game that I used to run called #NameThatThing. And I would take a plant or an animal or some sort of object and post a really close-up macro shot. And then, for a few days, let people guess, like, what do they think it does? And then I would show, the actual picture and say something about it. And it was fun. I enjoyed it. But one weird thing is that, for some reason, that hashtag has some sort of ban against it. I don't understand it, but whenever I would post my pictures, no one would ever see the original post. Like, so few people in the metrics would be able to see those posts. But when I posted, like, this is what it is, so many people would see that and be like, oh, I wish I had seen the earlier one, but like, we don't see it when you post it. So there's something weird with hashtags when you use certain hashtags, and I haven't figured that out, but I will. I do want to start posting that again, because it was fun.
All right. So another question here just came in from Anmal. So she's saying that we learned about, showing the audience why an issue is important to them, why they should care. What do you do in your writing to communicate your research, to kind of get that point to people, why they should care? Is there something you do, a formula, a special sauce?
I have 2 different conflicting minds about this. Because so a lot of what I study is frogs, and how they're going extinct because of this disease, and how we need people to care more about that and take action. And I struggle with this a bit, because obviously one of the first questions everyone wants to know is, why does it matter? And I sometimes have a hard time answering that, because part of me feels it matters because all species matter and biodiversity matters, and it all works in ways we don't exactly understand. And so at a base level, nature matters to me as an intact thing of itself, because we don't know the consequences of taking this piece out and this piece out and this piece out before the whole thing breaks. And I don't want us to keep waiting until that point when it all breaks, that we suddenly can look backwards and be like, oh, well, it was because that frog ate that and then that did that. But I find it difficult to sometimes explain that to people in a way that they get excited or care about, because as scientists, the public often wants numbers and facts and figures. So it's a challenge, but it's important to challenge that sometimes we don't have all the answers, and that doesn't mean things aren't important, but it makes it hard to talk about. And one of the common responses I used to give for that would be one that I was always taught people could relate to more, which is, how does it affect people personally, right? So in what way, shape, or form does wildlife extinction affect people? And there's things such as, you might hear, oh, well, amphibians eat insects, and there's plenty of insects that spread human diseases like malaria and Zika and dengue. So it matters to lots of people that, that are exposed to that. Frog tadpoles are like lawnmowers in the rivers. So they eat all this plant matter that might be falling into the water that would otherwise rot and decay and choke out, other things living there. So they keep the water quality high, and so on and so forth. And I did have one experience once that still kind of rattles me, because I was invited to give a really big presentation in Chile a couple years ago. And this is the response I gave when the audience asked that question. And afterwards, I was pulled aside by someone from the World Bank that was in the audience, this big mega institution with so much funding ability. And he pulled me aside and he said, I just want you to know, I really enjoyed your presentation, but I hated the way that you answered that question. And I was really taken aback, and I wanted to understand. And he said to me, and I still dwell on this, he said to me, I don't believe any of those answers you gave. Like, yes, they matter in some context, but like financially speaking and the number of people impacted, like that's not enough to convince me to care. If you had just hammered in how much you love frogs and why you love them and how fascinating they are, that would have meant more to me. And, that's not true for everyone. There's plenty of people that aren't going to care about that and want to know the dollars and cents. But it really rattled me that this guy sitting on millions of dollars said to me, it wasn't the financial or the human health aspect that I would have cared about. It was you sharing your passion for wildlife that we don't often care about. So yeah, I guess that's a long way of saying it depends on your audience. And going back to like what Krista says, I think we need to spend more time understanding our audience when we're trying to engage and educate people, so that we're talking the right way, but still being honest. Like they're all real answers. So it's not skewing things, it's not changing things. It's just, how do I speak to people more effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a woman by the name of Amanda join us not too long ago, and she studies sponges. And something that, before I spent 2 weeks with her on board the Nautilus, I didn't really give much thought to sponges, but her passion, her excitement, her enthusiasm for everything sponges do and why we should be paying more attention is what hooked me and got me thinking more about sponges. And I know more about sponges than I ever thought I was going to know about sponges. And a lot of it was her passion and her excitement for sharing that story.
Yeah, no, I find that really interesting because, here I am, I'm always like, oh, frogs are the overlooked and reptiles and stuff. But then I think about the sponge people and the worm people and the spider people. I mean, you name an animal and there's someone trying to protect it. And so many of them are just, unheard or unloved. And yeah, but it's a fun challenge to get people excited.
Yeah, absolutely. So students hanging out, feel free to fire some more questions in the chat, or don't be shy and turn your microphones on. That's always fun too. I do see some demands for the puppy, and maybe right at the very end, I will bring the puppy downstairs because I'm gonna have to bring him out after this so he can do whatever puppies do when they go outside. But Jonathan, you were working, it's U.S. Fish and Games or Wildlife Service?
U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So yeah, at the federal level.
Yeah, and then you decided to give the freelance writing thing a try. What kind of drove you to that? What was the impetus, the push to do that?
Yeah, so yeah, so I've, while I've done this frog stuff I was telling you about, I have had a day job. So a lot of this frog stuff is like my nights and weekends and my vacations. But meanwhile, I've been working for the US government, with the US Fish and Wildlife Service, mostly regulating the international wildlife trade. So enforcing laws and regulations against smuggling and things like that. Um, and yeah, so about a little over a year ago, I eventually decided to quit and plunge into the unknown of the freelance world, for a variety of reasons. Partly because, like the frog stuff I was telling you about takes up so much of my time and effort. And, yeah, I work till 1 or 2 in the morning a lot of times, coming home from work and then doing my research and applying for grants. And it just became unsustainable at a point. And I knew it for a while that I was kind of burning the candle at both ends, but I just thought, it's working until it's not. So, I mean, that was one part of it, was I wanted to devote more time to my own research and the things that I want to pursue. Also because in addition to writing, I'm doing a bit more work on filmmaking. So my partner is also freelance, and she's a wildlife filmmaker. And we've done a few small productions together for like National Geographic, California Academy of Science. And we've been wanting to devote more time to bigger science communication films and stuff. And it also didn't hurt that she's also an international citizen. So relationship-wise was also a factor in me not having a full-time job if you're going to have a partner that lives in Europe. And also because she's been so successful being freelance. I know there were some really good questions before about being freelance and how to make it work. And yeah, it's scary sometimes, but it's also kind of awesome. And yeah, and so with writing, I found that to be really interesting because as a scientist, but also being really interested in science communication, so I wrote my first story for National Geographic earlier in the year about the spread of diseases through the trade. And I found that a really interesting experience because even though I was writing about a subject that was really close and personal to me, it was the first time I've had to act as a journalist, interviewing people I was friends with, but like as an unbiased, journalist. And it was really interesting. It was a good experience to have to put myself on the sidelines and quote other people. And but I think it's a really important thing for scientists to try to do and become more involved in. And like what Krista was saying, was how do we share the work that we do in a way that can touch more people? And I know someone asked a question we didn't get to for her about jargon and scientific terms. And how do we talk to people better without not necessarily dumbing it down, but what if a certain term has a specific meaning that there isn't like an easy digestible explanation for it? I mean, I struggle with that too, but I think there's always a way of understanding your audience. You have to guess what their level of understanding is. That's the hard part for me. You have to envision your audience. A lot of times we think, oh, my audience is the general public. And so many times I've been told by editors, no, it's not. You can't just say you're talking to everyone. You have to envision who is the majority of the people that you're trying to reach. What do you want them to take away from it? And then you kind of craft, okay, so what kind of words do I think will resonate with them? And there was always a way of saying something complicated in a shorter, easier way to reach people. And that's one of the things I enjoy the most about filmmaking, because so my partner, Katie Garrett, her strength is making really short documentaries. So like we're talking like 3 minutes, like 3 to 5 minutes max, for really complicated topics. And that kind of also got me passionate about how to talk to people in a better way, because you can't tell a really complicated story in 3 minutes unless you get creative. And also considering people's attention span. I mean, I can't sit through a 5-minute video these days. So tell me something really complicated and get me to stay there. And I find it interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. What I do want to quickly share here, Jonathan, is a link if the students have some time afterwards. we did a really fun event. You had one of our satellite units in the cloud forest, you and Ben Mirren, and we had frogs. We were in the forest. We learned a ton. So I highly suggest, if you have some time today, students, check out this fun little event we did live from the field and see some of those really cool species. It was a lot of fun. So Jonathan, we won't keep you too much longer. If there are more questions, feel free to pop them into the chat while we wait to see if there's another one or two. There was another one about conclusion. You know, you always hear call to action or more research needs to be done or something like that. How do you find yourself concluding pieces of writing? What do you try to do?
That's also something that conflicts me. I'm a very mission-oriented person where it's like, if I'm going to invest all my time and effort to sharing a message, I feel like I have a responsibility to kind of lead people in a certain direction that I think is helpful or beneficial. And I've always felt that way. But at the same time, that's not always so easy. You know, so for example, a lot of the work I do right now is with international trade and how there's no policy in the United States preventing the importation of diseased animals, you know, largely speaking. And a lot of people will ask, oh, what do I do about that? And it's a struggle for me because I'm working at a federal level trying to change policy, but people care enough to want to be engaged. So there's always ways to like break things down to smaller chunks, like, oh, you should ask more questions when you buy pets. Where did they come from? Were they, you know, checked for disease, things like that. But I also do want to acknowledge the importance of sometimes not necessarily having a one single direct conclusion. And this is something I've learned from my partner I was talking about, because we've kind of, you know, we work together really well, but there's a few things we butt heads on, and this is one. And it's meaningful to me because she is very much more along the lines of, I just want to get people to love things and you know, show these reptiles and amphibians, you know, things that people don't often love, and show really intimate macros and really neat things, and then use that to get people to start caring. And at first I kind of wasn't convinced. I felt that was so out of my comfort zone of like, but what's the message? What's the mission? But she's totally convinced me that sometimes the way you start a message or a mission is just taking a step even further back and being like, how can I at least get people to start liking these things? And sometimes that isn't slamming a message in people's face that this is what you need to do next. It's just, look how amazing this snake is or this frog is in a perspective that maybe you didn't think of before. And then maybe the second or third discussion is, now what should we do to actually, you know, make some changes? And I'll just last that on one last note. On a similar line, I went to a talk once. I was gonna say I won't name names, but I will, because she's important. Elizabeth Colbert, who writes some amazing environmental journalism pieces. She wrote The Sixth Extinction, and I'll never forget when I went to hear her speak many years ago at Rutgers about her book. She gave a phenomenal presentation. And at the end, one of the students asked her pretty much this question. They said, I've read some of your really great writing about all these environmental crises, but the one thing I've noticed is that at the end of your pieces, there's not really a call to action. It just kind of ends. And they asked her, do you not feel a responsibility to provide, you know, solutions or suggestions? And at first her response really prickled me the wrong way, but now I understand it. And she basically said, no, that's not my job. Like I'm a journalist. I collect the facts, I collect the information, and I transform it into a way that the public can grasp it and understand it. But she felt that in her position, you know, it wasn't her place to then tell people what they need to do. Like that is still your decision to make based on now having the facts that you needed to make that decision. And again, you know, back at that time, I was of the mindset that like, we always have to give people, tell them what to do. But now I do understand and value that perspective as well. So I think there's no one right or wrong way. It's very context dependent.
Yeah, and you know, that's something we kind of touched on early on is you can't just, if you come off as just telling people they're wrong and you're right, you're going to lose people immediately.
Totally. And I see that so much working with the government. You know, A lot of people want to know, how do I change policy? How do I do this? How do I do that? And so many times, I mean, I have to be honest, like the way that scientists and governments speak to each other is very antagonistic. You know, everyone means well and they really care, but I think there's still some reluctance to embrace the fact that people have different values. And you need, it all comes down to understanding that person's values. You might not agree with them, but you have to understand them and not attack them to convince them why they should care about your values. And that's, I mean, that's the ultimate challenge is, you know, how do I build a relationship with someone that I disagree with? But you have to build relationships. And yeah, I see that question on the side. That's exactly what is the undertone is bias. And that's actually something I've struggled with, because even in my own writing, when I do give people a message and I'm like, this is why you should care, this is what you should do, you know, I do sometimes take a step backwards and think about what I'm doing and saying and think, well, yes, I think what I'm doing is the right thing to do because I'm a conservationist. I care about the big picture, but I'm still biased, you know? So like, even when I'm telling people, here's a path forward, that's a bias because someone else, you know, might disagree and they have their own reasons. And even though I think my reason might be the right reason, that's a bias. So I think it's just so important to continue to remember that we all have biases, and it's fine. I think scientists in particular are really scared sometimes to admit that, right? Because we're afraid that we won't be taken seriously. Like, we're not supposed to have feelings or opinions. Here's the data. But I think that's a bit of a scam, because we all have feelings and opinions about what our work means. Why does it matter? And I think we should share that more, but we have to share it within the context of, this is where the data stops, and this is where I am speaking as a human, and you can take that or leave it, but it matters. And I don't see that shared very often.
That was great, Jonathan. I love the way that you share that, making that differentiation. Because on one hand, you do have to, you know, report the facts and where they are, but then you're a human, and that's part of good science writing, is telling a story and bringing humanity to the scientists, to the person who's writing it. That's an important thing to do with your science writing.
Yeah, and you know, going back to something Krista said about, you know, when she reads these papers, and then she calls people and starts asking them about their experiences. You know, what was it like sitting there for 1,000 hours going through your camera footage? And I mean, those are the kind of things that, as a scientist, I care more about that. Like, yeah, I can read your results in 5 sentences, but I don't feel connected to that, you know. But I, as a scientist, I want to know why you were excited. I want to know why you hated it. Like, to me, that's what's going to make me remember why you did this work, what the point was, why it matters, and want to stick around and know more. So, you know, when I make films with my partner, I mean, those are the first questions we ask a scientist. Like, I could read a paper and be like, this is so boringly written, but I bet the person behind this is super enthusiastic. And that's the human story that we connect with sometimes more than the science. And I think that's an important vehicle in writing and in film. Is, to me, it's how do you package science inside a human story? Because I think the human aspect is what we can connect more easily with. And then if I can connect with the person behind this, then maybe I can understand and value why they did this.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, Jonathan, thank you so much. Thanks for spending some time with us this afternoon. It's always great to hear you talk about science writing, social media. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope in the not too distant future, we're raising a few at Lucky Bar, because it's been far too long.
Yes.
And yeah, maybe while you're still on this side of the ocean, we should definitely have a chat and catch up to know what you're up to and how things are going.
Yeah, and I'm also gonna pop my email on the side if anyone has questions. Here. I'm always happy.
So I'm going to give the people what they want. I'm going to go get my puppy. You don't have to stick around. You can be free and get on with your afternoon. But once we say goodbye, I'll run and get the puppy. It's up to you whether you stay or not. I won't think less of you if you want to go get your afternoon going. So again,
my email's in there. Feel free to reach out anytime. And yeah, have a good one.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan. And hopefully we talk soon.
All right. Bye.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I'm going to go grab Griffin and you can meet Griffin. So I will be right back in 1 second. Few seconds. All right. As promised, here is Griffin. Griffin is a golden retriever, German Shepherd. He's, what are you now? Like 13, 14 weeks, something like that. So he's growing fast. He's going to be a big boy. He almost fit in, well, I don't know. I'd say he fit almost in 2 of my hands when we first got him. So he's grown quite a bit since then. Yeah, have you? And so, yeah, this is Griff. And yes, I met my wife at Guelph. We both lived in Johnston Hall in our first year at Guelph. And then we were friends through university. And then we started dating in 4th year. So that's right. This is Griffin, named after Guelph and my time there. That's right, a Johnston Hall romance. It didn't happen until after Johnston Hall, but it did happen. A movie. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed meeting Krista and Jonathan today. Krista's a great writer. It's it was great to get some of her perspective. Go to her website, even though she said don't. She hasn't updated her work for a while, but up until like 2018, 2019, she has pieces up there that she's done over several years leading up to like 2018, 2019. So check out some of the work that she did there. And then Jonathan, check him out on social media at My Frog Croaked, at a whole bunch of different Instagram, Tumblr, Facebook. I think you can find him there too. So it's great to talk to Jonathan and hear some of his perspectives. And I see a lot of people would like to go to that pandemic movie. So maybe I'll talk to Jonathan's partner and see if she can pull together like a 3 to 5 minute Johnston Hall romance piece. And of course, Griffin will be in it as well. So we'll see what they can pull together. So thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed getting to meet a few people this week. Any questions, of course, don't hesitate to fire away via email. I will catch up on those today. And have you made, 100%, 4 blog posts, 5th one is optional. I'll put that in writing on the website so that if you can come back to it if I change my mind, which I won't, but I'll put that in writing on the website. 4 blog posts, 5th one is optional for a little bonus action. And I'm going to get Griffin outside before he pees on my office floor, which would not be great. So thanks everyone. Have a great weekend, and we will get things going. Hey, Griff, we'll get things going next week. I
just have a quick question.
Yeah, go for it.
For the article that we're doing for the thing that's due on Monday the 22nd.
Yeah.
Would we be able to do like a National Geographic article, or does it have to be like a scientific literature type thing?
Scientific literature, because that's always, National Geographic tries to appeal already to a broad audience. Hey, buddy. So we really want that jargon-filled, boring old paper that we can turn into something better for the audience. Okay.
Hey, Professor, can I just ask something really, really quickly? I'm sorry, I know we have to take care of Griffin, which by was super cute. So I found this really awesome review article from one of the medical journals, and I just have a question. How should I cite or like mention this article in the assignment? Like, do I have to cite it in somewhere, or do I just like provide a link?
What we did last time around is it was just included the link to it. Similar to what you did for what was it that we had? Similar to like the oral presentation where you just shared a link to the original piece. So if you can do that, that's fine.
Oh, okay. Because I think the article is restricted access, so I think it's only restricted to people that have access to journals. So I was wondering if we should do anything else beside just
No,
providing.
link it back, and if I can see that it's exists, that's fine.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. I am going to get this character outside, and I will see everybody next week. Thanks, everyone.